Ethan nodded, feeling the urgency. The longer they stayed here, the more time the criminals had to regroup. They couldn't afford any delays. The two of them quickly gathered the unconscious criminals and their leader, locking them in one of the nearby rooms before heading to the exit. The facility was eerily quiet now, the only sound the hum of the old machinery in the distance. It was as if the calm before the storm had settled over them, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. They made their way back to the transport docks, where Kyra's ship was parked. The sleek black vessel stood out against the gray landscape of the settlement, its engines humming softly as they approached. Ethan climbed aboard first, followed by Kyra. She quickly set the coordinates for the hidden facility, and with a few swift commands, the ship's engines roared to life. As they took off into the sky, the weight of the situation became even clearer. They were heading into the heart of danger, and there was no telling what they would find when they got there. But Ethan couldn't back down. Not now. Not when so many lives were at stake. The ship shot through the atmosphere, the stars stretching out before them as they left the planet behind. It was a long journey ahead, but Ethan knew that they couldn't waste any more time. Every second counted. Kyra sat beside him, her focus unshaken, her resolve firm. She had been through so much already, but this was different. The bond between them was growing stronger, and as much as it terrified him, Ethan knew they had to face whatever came next, together. The galaxy was on the brink of chaos, and only they could stop it. Ethan gripped the controls, his eyes fixed on the horizon. There was no turning back now. It had been a routine mission for Jason Lee aboard the ESS Horizon. As a ship's engineer, his work usually involved checking and repairing the ship's systems. But today it was different. The ship was docked at an alien trade station, one that had never been explored by humans. The Kivatari, a species known for their bright, glowing skin, had invited Earth to join them for a diplomatic exchange. It was a rare opportunity, and Jason was tasked with handling the ship's technical aspects while the crew handled the talks. Jason walked down the metal corridors of the station, the sound of his boots echoing softly. The alien architecture was unlike anything on Earth: smooth, curved surfaces, soft glowing lights in various colors, and walls that seemed to hum with energy. The air smelled faintly of something sweet, a mix of floral and metallic scents that Jason couldn't quite place. As he made his way to the maintenance bay, he saw a figure standing alone by a window. It was a Kivatari woman, tall and slender, with skin that shimmered in hues of green and blue. Her face was calm, but something about her posture caught Jason's attention. She was slumped slightly, as if struggling to stand. Curious, Jason approached her. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice polite but hesitant. The woman turned toward him, her eyes glowing faintly. Her lips parted, as if she was about to say something, but instead, her body swayed. She gasped for air, her skin flickering like a dying light. Before Jason could react, she collapsed in front of him. Instinct kicked in. Jason rushed forward, catching her just before she hit the floor. The weight of her body felt surprisingly light, and yet the glow in her skin was weakening with every second. He could hear her labored breathing, shallow and faint. "Hey, are you okay?" Jason asked urgently. He wasn't a doctor, but he knew something was wrong. Her skin, normally radiant, was dulling. Her once vibrant glow had faded to a soft flicker, like a candle running out of wax. The woman blinked up at him, her eyes wide with panic. "Help me," she whispered weakly, her voice barely audible. Jason carefully helped her sit up against the wall. "What happened? Are you hurt?" He looked around, but there was no one else nearby to call for help. He had to act quickly. She struggled to speak, but words came out in broken syllables. "Clogged duct." Jason frowned, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "What do you mean, a clogged duct?" His mind raced, recalling something he'd read about the Kivatari. They were bioluminescent creatures, their bodies regulated by a network of energy ducts that controlled everything from bodily functions to their glowing light. If one of those ducts became blocked, it could cause serious issues. But what exactly did she mean? Before Jason could ask more, the woman's glow flickered even more, and she collapsed again in his arms. She wasn't unconscious, but her energy seemed to be slipping away, fading like the last rays of sunset. Jason knew he had to act fast. He couldn't just stand here and watch her die. He stood up, lifting her carefully in his arms. "Hang on, okay. I'll get you some help." He was certain she didn't have much time left. Jason started walking in the direction of the medical bay. The cafeteria had advanced technology, so there must be some sort of medical team nearby. He passed a few alien workers who glanced up briefly, but didn't seem to notice the urgency in his pace. He reached the medical bay, hoping to find someone who could help, but the room was strangely quiet. No doctors, no nurses, just an empty space filled with strange medical equipment Jason didn't recognize. He looked down at the woman in his arms. Her breathing had become slower, more uneven. "Please, just hold on." He gently lowered her to the floor, running to the nearest console to try and access the station's emergency systems. But the controls were alien to him, and he couldn't make sense of the symbols on the screen. He returned to her side, kneeling beside her. She was fading fast. The thought of losing her, of not being able to help, made his heart race. "I'm not leaving you," he whispered under his breath. He glanced around again, trying to figure out what he could do. He couldn't just sit here and do nothing. His eyes fell on a small medical kit attached to the wall. It wasn't much, but it was something. Jason grabbed it, hoping there might be something inside that could help her. The kit contained basic supplies, bandages, antiseptic, a few strange tools, but nothing that could solve the problem. He was running out of options. As he knelt beside her again, she opened her eyes, weakly meeting his gaze. There was a flicker of recognition in her expression. She trusted him. "Please, help." Her voice was barely a whisper now, but it was enough to remind Jason why he had to try. He couldn't just give up. He stood up again, a sudden idea forming in his mind. He had a medical background from his time on Earth, and although he was far from an expert, he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't leave her to die without trying. Jason paced back and forth in the quiet medical bay, his mind racing. The woman, Vrelka, lay on the cold metal table, her glowing skin flickering like a dying light. He felt helpless. He wasn't a doctor, but he had enough experience to know something was terribly wrong. Her breathing was shallow, her once vibrant glow now reduced to a dim, flickering pulse. "Clogged duct," Jason whispered to himself, trying to make sense of her words. What did that even mean? He had read about the cavitari before. They were a fascinating species, bioluminescent beings whose bodies were regulated by intricate energy ducts. These ducts were responsible for their light, their strength, and their overall well-being. If one of these ducts became blocked, it could cause serious damage to their entire system. But Jason had no idea how to help. The medical kit in the bay had only basic supplies, and nothing there would fix whatever was wrong with her. He needed to act fast, but what could he do? He glanced down at her. Her eyes fluttered open, and she weakly looked up at him. The glow in her eyes had faded to a dim yellow, and her breathing had become even more labored. She was slipping away. "Vrelka," Jason muttered, feeling the weight of her name. He barely knew her, but the desperation in her eyes had left a mark on him. She trusted him, and that trust was all he had to go on. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked gently, his voice barely above a whisper. He knew she was weak, but if there was a chance to save her, he needed more information. Her eyes flickered again, struggling to focus on him. "Blockage. Energy," she managed to say, her voice barely audible. "Need. Unblock." Her words were broken, as if every breath she took required immense effort. Jason's heart sank. It sounded like the problem was internal, something deep inside her body, a blockage that was cutting off her energy supply. He glanced at her chest, where the faint light of her glow was still visible, though it was barely a shimmer now. The cavitary's bioluminescence wasn't just a physical feature, it was an essential part of who they were. Their light represented their life force, their vitality. Without it, they could not survive. But a blockage, could it really be that simple? Jason shook his head. He had no time to waste. He couldn't figure this out alone. There had to be a way to help her. But the medical systems on the station were alien to him, and he didn't know how to access the advanced treatments that might be available. What he did know was that he couldn't just leave her. Without thinking, he rushed to the console again, hoping to find something useful. The symbols on the screen were foreign, the technology far beyond what humanity had achieved. But there was a small blinking icon that seemed to signal the station's medical network. Jason hit the button, praying it would give him some direction. The screen flickered, and a map of the station appeared. Several medical facilities were listed, some nearby, some farther away. Jason's eyes skimmed over the options. He wasn't sure what the best course of action was, but he knew he needed to get her to a cavitary doctor, someone who could understand her anatomy and provide treatment. But the moment he moved toward the door, he stopped. The hallway outside the medical bay was empty. The cavitary were a proud people, and they might not welcome human involvement in their medical matters. They might even see Jason's interference as an insult. The last thing he wanted was to make things worse. He turned back to Vrelka. She was still breathing, but it was getting harder to tell if she was still conscious. The light in her eyes had dimmed further, and Jason could see how much she was struggling. He had to act, and he had to act now. Jason made up his mind. He would have to try something himself, something untested, something risky. He'd studied the cavitary's bioluminescent anatomy before, and he remembered reading about the ducts that regulated their energy flow. If one of those ducts became blocked, their glow would flicker and die. But if he could clear the blockage, her light would return. He wasn't sure how to do it, but he had to try. He moved to her side and gently lifted her again, this time placing her on a more stable examination table. He knew this was risky, but as he looked at her fading glow, he couldn't help but feel a surge of determination. She trusted him to help her, and he wasn't about to let her down. Jason quickly accessed a data terminal on the table, pulling up what little medical information he could find on the cavitary. He looked for anything that might give him a clue about how to treat this energy blockage. The cavitary's physiology was complex, but he found one piece of useful information. The energy ducts were connected to their nervous system, and any disruption in the flow could lead to catastrophic results. The solution wasn't clear, but one thing was certain: he couldn't waste any more time. He had to take a chance. He looked back at Vrelka, her skin now barely glowing, her body growing colder. He steadied himself and prepared to try something drastic. He hoped that his understanding of human medicine and whatever little he knew about the cavitary might be enough. "Hold on, Vrelka," Jason whispered, more to himself than to her. "I'm not giving up on you." With determination, Jason set to work. Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he stared down at the cavitary woman, Vrelka, her condition deteriorating by the second. Her glow had nearly faded completely, and her breaths were shallow, like someone struggling to hold on to their last breath. He could see the flickers of light slowly vanishing, one spark at a time, as if her life was slipping away with the dimming of her skin. Jason stood over her, his mind racing. He knew he had to act, but what could he do? The cavitary didn't have the same medical techniques as humans. Their biology was far different, their anatomy and systems alien. The idea of doing something invasive was terrifying, but it seemed to be his only choice. The information on the station's terminal didn't help much. It gave him some details about the cavitary's biology, but there was nothing that told him how to clear an energy duct blockage. He was grasping at straws, and the fear of failing weighed heavily on him. He looked at her again, her pale face almost completely drained of color. Despite all the knowledge available on the station, none of the Kivateri doctors had been able to help her. Jason had been told that there were no known human treatments for the problem, that it was impossible for them to understand or interfere with the Kivateri's unique biology. But Vrelka needed him now, and that was all that mattered. "Okay," Jason muttered under his breath. "Let's figure this out." He was no expert, but he had worked with human anatomy enough to have a basic understanding of how energy systems worked. The Kivateri were different, yes, but the principle was the same. Blockages in vital systems could cause catastrophic failure. He knew he had to remove the blockage, but how? He couldn't just reach inside her body. That would be too risky, too damaging. Jason hesitated. He had a choice to make. He could follow the station's protocol and wait for the Kivateri medical team to return, or he could break protocol, take the risk, and try to help Vrelka himself. But if he failed, if something went wrong, he would be responsible. The thought of causing harm to her, even unintentionally, made his stomach churn. Jason took a deep breath and closed his eyes, mentally gathering his courage. He couldn't sit back and do nothing while Vrelka suffered. She had trusted him when she had no reason to, and that trust was something he couldn't betray. He couldn't wait for the Kivateri to come around. Time was running out. He made his decision. Jason quickly scanned the tools available in the medical bay. The Kivateri technology was advanced, but the equipment was designed for their species. Most of the tools were focused on their unique needs, like adjusting their light levels or calming their bioluminescence. Nothing in the room seemed useful for clearing a duct blockage. But then, Jason's eyes landed on a medical laser, a small device that could cut through tissue with pinpoint precision. It wasn't meant for use in such a delicate situation, but it was the best option available. He knew it would be risky, but he had no choice. Jason's hands were shaking as he picked up the device. The pressure in the room felt heavy, almost suffocating, but he pushed forward. He had to focus. If he failed now, Vrelka would be gone, and everything he had worked for would be in vain. He turned to her, trying to steady his nerves. "I'm going to help you," he said, his voice low but firm. "Just hold on." With careful hands, Jason positioned the laser near her skin, where the faintest shimmer of her bioluminescence was still visible. He took one last breath before activating the laser, guiding it with precision over her body. The tool hummed to life in his hands, its beam sharp and focused. The incision wasn't deep. He had to be delicate. Too much pressure or an unsteady hand could cause permanent damage, but too little might not be enough to clear the blockage. The soft, high-pitched sound of the laser filled the room as it sliced through the surface of her skin. Jason's heart raced, but he remained focused. He couldn't afford to lose his concentration now. As he worked, Vrelka's body twitched in response, her energy flickering once more. Jason looked at her face, seeing the sharp lines of pain, but also something else, something that reminded him of the trust she had placed in him. It made him push harder, despite the fear creeping up his spine. Jason paused for a moment, checking the incision he had made. It seemed to be the right path, but the blockage was still there. He couldn't see it with his eyes, but he could feel it. An unnatural resistance to the laser beam, a sense that something was obstructing the flow of energy. His stomach tightened. "Please, please," Jason muttered under his breath, his voice a mix of frustration and desperation. "Just a little more." With renewed determination, Jason pressed on. The soft glow that had once surrounded Vrelka's body flickered again, first weakly, then stronger. Jason's heart skipped a beat. Was it working? Was the blockage finally being cleared? Vrelka's body shuddered, and for a brief moment, Jason thought he had made a mistake. But then, the glow started to return, gradually growing brighter and steadier. Her breathing seemed to stabilize, and the life force that had been slowly draining from her began to return. Jason's hands shook as he watched the light return to her skin. It wasn't as bright as it once was, but it was enough. It was a sign of hope. Her eyes flickered open again, this time more focused. You did it," she whispered, her voice weak but full of gratitude. Jason let out a sigh of relief. "You're going to be okay, Vrelka." He smiled, even though his body was still trembling. It wasn't over yet, but this was the first real sign of progress. But Jason knew he hadn't done it alone. She had trusted him when no one else would. And that trust had saved her life. Vrelka's breath was steadier now, the faint glow of her skin returning. The dim light, once nearly extinguished, was now a soft, steady pulse beneath her skin. Jason stood over her, still holding the medical laser in his hands, though his fingers were trembling from the strain of what he had just done. He couldn't believe it. Against all odds, he had actually managed to help her. The blockage, whatever it had been, seemed to have cleared. And Vrelka was breathing easier. Jason allowed himself a moment to breathe, the tension in his chest lifting slightly. But he knew the battle wasn't over. She wasn't completely out of danger yet. Vrelka opened her eyes fully now, and they locked with his. Her gaze was clear, no longer clouded with pain or confusion. The light in her eyes had returned, though it was faint. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice fragile but filled with gratitude. She tried to sit up, but her body was weak, her movements slow and unsteady. She had been through something intense, and it would take time for her body to fully recover. Jason quickly moved to her side, helping her sit up. "Take it easy," he said gently. "You've been through a lot. You need to rest." Vrelka nodded, but her eyes seemed focused, determined. She didn't look like someone who was ready to give up. "You saved me," she said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. "I should have never trusted a human, but you helped me. I owe you my life." Jason shook his head. "I just did what anyone would do. You trusted me, and I couldn't just let you go." She looked at him with a mixture of awe and confusion. "I don't understand. I've never seen a human act like this before. You risk everything to help someone you don't even know." Jason gave a small smile. "I don't need to know everything about you to know you needed help. I couldn't stand by and watch you suffer. And besides," he added with a light chuckle, "we're not all bad." Vrelka studied him, her expression softening. Humans are strange," she said softly, "but you're not entirely what I expected." Jason was about to respond when the door to the medical bay slid open with a soft hiss. The quiet, unfamiliar voice of a veterinary doctor filled the room. "What has happened here?" The voice was stern, but Jason noticed a hint of worry beneath it. A veterinary medical officer entered the room, her shimmering green and blue skin almost blinding in its vibrancy. She was tall, her long limbs moving with grace. Her eyes, however, were locked on Vrelka, who was sitting upright with only a slight struggle. Vrelka's expression darkened at the sight of the doctor, and Jason felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. He had acted on his own instincts, breaking protocol to save her. Now, it seemed, the veterinary medical staff had arrived, and he had no idea how they would react. I took action," Jason said hesitantly, meeting the doctor's gaze. "She was in distress, and I couldn't just wait for help. I helped clear a blockage in her energy ducts." The doctor's eyes narrowed, and Jason could feel the tension rising. Vrelka shifted slightly beside him, but Jason could see her body still wasn't strong enough to fully sit up without his help. The doctor approached Vrelka, eyes scanning her body, before slowly turning to Jason. "You are a human," the doctor said slowly, "and you performed a procedure on a veterinary. That is highly unorthodox. Our biology is far different from yours, and your species has no understanding of our medical systems." Jason's heart sank. He had expected this. He had broken a lot of rules, and now it seemed like he was about to face the consequences. He had helped her, yes, but the veterinary were a proud species. They wouldn't take kindly to a human meddling with their complex biology. "I know," Jason said, his voice steady, despite the fear gnawing at him. "I didn't know what else to do. I saw her fading, and I couldn't just wait. I did what I thought was right." The doctor studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, surprisingly, she nodded slowly. You acted with great care. You have risked much, human. And while we do not condone your interference, we must acknowledge that your actions have prevented a tragedy. I will defer to Vrelka's wishes. If she believes your actions have saved her life, we will not oppose you. Jason's eyes widened in relief. Vrelka looked up at the doctor, her gaze unwavering, and nodded slowly. I believe he saved me, Vrelka said quietly but firmly. He did what I could not ask of anyone else, and he saved me from death. The doctor's eyes softened slightly. Very well. You have my gratitude, human. It seems you have earned the right to be called a friend to the cavitary. Jason let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. It wasn't a full victory yet, but it was a start. The cavitary were a proud people, and he knew he had just earned a rare form of respect from them. Thank you, Jason said, his voice sincere. I just wanted to make sure she was okay. Vrelka smiled weakly, the glow of her skin growing brighter by the second. I'll never forget this, she whispered. The doctor turned to leave, but not before offering one last comment. You have done something few humans have ever done. Saved a cavitary life. Your actions speak louder than words. If you ever need assistance, you will find us willing to help. Jason nodded, feeling the weight of the doctor's words. It was more than just saving Vrelka. It was about understanding one another, breaking barriers, and earning trust in a world of unfamiliar beings. As the doctor left the room, Jason and Vrelka were left in silence for a moment. Her glow had returned, and her body seemed to be gaining strength by the second. Jason couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. But more than that, a bond had been forged between them, one that he knew would not be easily broken. Vrelka turned to him, her smile genuine. Thank you, Jason. You've changed everything for me. Jason smiled back. It was my pleasure. Let's just hope this is the beginning of something good. Jason stood quietly by Vrelka's side, watching as she rested in the medical bay. Her skin glowed steadily now, and her breathing was deep and regular. It was a good sign. She was getting better, much better than when he had first found her. Her strength had returned more quickly than he expected, and for the first time since he'd arrived on the station, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. The cavitary doctor's approval still echoed in his mind. Jason had known that his actions had been risky, but it felt good to know that, at least for now, he had made the right choice. It wasn't every day a human could earn the trust of an entire alien species. Vrelka's eyes fluttered open, and she gave him a weak smile. I never thought I'd see you again, she said softly, her voice still tinged with exhaustion. Jason smiled back. I wasn't about to leave you behind. Her smile widened a little, though it was clear she was still recovering. She shifted slightly on the bed, testing her strength. I owe you so much. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to, Jason replied. I just did what I could. Vrelka sat up slowly, this time with less effort than before. She was clearly getting stronger by the minute. It's not just the medical help, she said thoughtfully. You didn't have to save me. The cavitary are. Well, we are a proud species. We don't usually ask for help, especially from outsiders. Jason leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. You don't have to ask for help to get it. If I see someone in need, I do what I can. It's just how I was raised. Vrelka looked at him with renewed curiosity, as if seeing him in a new light. Humanity is strange, yet it makes sense. You help, even when it's not your place. Most species would leave a person to their fate if they weren't directly involved. Jason nodded. Maybe that's our strength. We don't always know the right way to help, but we try. And sometimes that's enough. Vrelka tilted her head, considering his words. I think I understand now. You helped me, even without knowing everything about my people. That's something few others would do. Jason met her gaze. I think it's the same with all beings, really. Sometimes, you just have to trust that others can do the right thing. I didn't know anything about you, Vrelka, but I knew you were in pain. And that was enough for me. There was a long silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Instead, it felt like something had changed in their dynamic, like a quiet understanding had been reached. Vrelka broke the silence first. You know, Jason, I think you've earned a place among the Cavateri. You've done what few others have. You've proven that we can trust you. Jason raised an eyebrow. That's a pretty big compliment. I mean it, she said, sitting up straighter, her body now stronger than it had been earlier. You didn't just treat me as another species to fix. You treated me like an equal. That's something the Cavateri value more than anything. Jason couldn't help but feel a sense of pride at her words. I'm just trying to do the right thing. Maybe the Cavateri aren't so different from us after all. Vrelka's smile was warmer now. Maybe not. Perhaps we have more in common than we realize. Before Jason could respond, the door to the medical bay slid open again, and the same Cavateri doctor entered. This time, there was no suspicion in her eyes, only respect. She moved over to Vrelka, her gaze flickering over her condition. You're doing much better, the doctor said, her voice calm. We've monitored your energy levels, and they seem to be stabilizing. The blockage has been cleared, and your bioluminescence is almost back to normal. Vrelka gave the doctor a grateful look. Thank you. I don't know where I would be without your help. The doctor nodded, but her gaze shifted toward Jason. And to you, human, she said, her tone still formal, but now with a hint of admiration. You have proven yourself. Your actions today have earned you not just our respect, but our trust as well. Jason felt a warm sense of accomplishment, though he remained humble. I just did what anyone would have done in my place. The doctor studied him for a moment, then nodded. Perhaps, but it is rare for an outsider to go beyond their own nature for the good of another species. That is a trait we value. She turned back to Vrelka, her expression softening. You're free to go, but take it slow. Your recovery will take time. But with what we've seen today, we have no doubt you'll make a full recovery. Vrelka nodded. Thank you. The doctor offered one last look at Jason before leaving the room. We'll continue monitoring, but you may be right in saying the worst is over. The door slid shut behind her, leaving Jason and Vrelka alone once again. Vrelka stretched out slowly, testing her strength. She was clearly improving, but Jason knew she would need time. Even so, it was clear that her life had been saved, not just by medical technology, but by a human who chose to help. Jason, Vrelka said softly, her voice now stronger. I'm grateful, not just for saving my life, but for showing me something I never expected. I thought we Cavateri had all the answers, that we were so different from others. But you've shown me that maybe we're not so different after all. Jason smiled, feeling the warmth of her words. I think we're more alike than we realize. Vrelka's smile deepened. Maybe one day, we'll show the galaxy just how much alike we are. There's a lot to learn from each other, if we're open to it. Jason nodded. I'd like that. I'd like that a lot. As Vrelka's glow grew brighter and steadier, Jason knew that this was just the beginning, not just of her recovery, but of a new understanding between their worlds. The road ahead might be uncertain, but they had taken the first step together. The days following Vrelka's recovery passed by quickly, and Jason found himself spending more time on the Cavateri ship than he ever imagined. The medical staff had been keeping a close eye on her, but Vrelka seemed eager to get back to her duties. Her strength was returning rapidly, and with it, her determination. Jason had been given a temporary place to stay on the Cavateri ship, a room that overlooked the vastness of space. The view was breathtaking, the stars shimmering in all directions. But more than the beauty of space, Jason found himself increasingly fascinated by the Cavateri culture, which was far more complex than he had first imagined. He and Vrelka would often talk late into the night, learning about each other's worlds. Vrelka shared stories of her people, of their history, their values, and the challenges they faced in maintaining peace across the stars. She spoke of the vast Kiviteri Empire, which spanned many systems, and their philosophy of unity and collective strength. Jason, in turn, told her about Earth, about the history of humanity, the struggles they faced to come together as a species, and how they had come to space with a sense of hope and ambition. Vrelka listened intently, her bright eyes fixed on him as she asked thoughtful questions. Despite their differences, Jason found that they had more in common than he had expected. Both of their species had faced adversity, but they had also found ways to overcome it. Jason had always believed that the universe was full of endless possibilities, but now he could see that the true strength of any species came from its willingness to work together, to understand one another, and to face challenges as one. One evening, after a particularly deep conversation, Vrelka spoke up, her voice thoughtful. "Jason, I've been thinking about something. You've shown me so much, and I feel like I've learned more about humans in the past few days than I could have in a lifetime of study. But I'm still not sure about one thing." Jason raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Vrelka's gaze softened, and she took a deep breath. "Your people, you're still learning how to come together, aren't you? There are so many different cultures, so many ideas. How do you manage to stay united when there's so much disagreement?" Jason leaned back, staring out at the stars for a moment, considering her question. It was something he had thought about many times, but he had never really had to explain it to anyone who wasn't human. "We don't always stay united," he said, his voice quiet. "In fact, there are times when it feels like we're falling apart. But we've learned that it's okay to disagree. The challenge is finding ways to listen to each other and learn from those differences." Vrelka nodded, her eyes still on him. "That's the heart of the Kiviteri way too. We value unity above all else. But we also know that unity isn't just about agreeing. It's about understanding, respecting, and coming together to find solutions. That's what I see in you. You have that same spirit." Jason smiled at her words, feeling a warmth in his chest. He hadn't expected to hear something so profound from an alien species. But there was truth in it, and he could feel it in his bones. Perhaps it was that very spirit of unity that allowed them to connect, despite the vast differences between their worlds. A soft chime from the ship's communication system interrupted their conversation. Jason turned to see a small screen flashing with a message. "It's from the station," he said, frowning slightly. "I'm needed for a meeting. Something about a diplomatic mission." He stood up, gathering his things. "I guess that's my cue to go." Vrelka stood as well, offering him a small, knowing smile. "I'm sure you'll do fine, Jason. I know you'll represent your people well." Jason smiled back at her. "Thanks, Vrelka. I'll see you later." As he left the room, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening, something that was just beginning to unfold. He had come to this ship to help someone in need, but now, he realized, he was part of something much greater, an alliance between humans and the Kiviteri. The meeting was held in one of the ship's main conference rooms, a sleek, metallic space with walls that shimmered with the same bioluminescent glow that marked the Kiviteri's skin. Jason sat at the table, surrounded by several Kiviteri diplomats and high-ranking officers. The room was quiet, everyone waiting for the meeting to begin. A Kiviteri official, tall and imposing, stepped forward. He was the one who had originally voiced the concerns about Jason's involvement in Vrelka's medical treatment. But now, his tone had changed. There was no hostility, no suspicion, only calm professionalism. "We are here today to discuss a matter of great importance," the official said. "The Kiviteri and humanity have been in contact for some time, but it is clear that we are at the start of something new. We have witnessed a human willing to put aside differences and risk his life to help one of our own. That is not something we take lightly." Jason felt the weight of their words. He wasn't sure where this meeting would lead, but he knew one thing for certain. The Kiviteri were now looking at humanity in a new light. His actions had opened a door, one that could lead to further cooperation, even an alliance. The official continued, "We believe that the time has come for a formal partnership between our species. We understand the complexities of such an agreement, but we also recognize the potential benefits. Together, we can face challenges far greater than we could alone." Jason's heart raced. He had always dreamed of a future where humans and alien species could work together for the greater good, but to hear it spoken out loud, to know that this was really happening, it was overwhelming. The official looked at him directly. "Jason Miller, you have proven that humanity has the potential to be a trusted ally. We propose that you serve as a liaison, a representative of your people, as we begin this journey of cooperation." Jason sat up straighter, his mind racing. "I'll do my best," he said, his voice steady. "I won't let you down." And as he spoke those words, he knew that this moment was only the beginning. The alliance between humanity and the Cavatari had started with a simple act of kindness, but it would grow into something much greater. Together, they would face the challenges of the future, side by side. Jason stood in front of the large observation window, looking out at the vast expanse of space. The stars stretched out before him like an endless sea, twinkling with possibilities. It had been a few weeks since the meeting, and things had been moving faster than he ever expected. The formal partnership between humanity and the Cavatari was now in progress, and Jason had been chosen to serve as the liaison between the two species. He wasn't sure if he was ready for such an important role, but he knew he had to give it everything he had. The Cavatari had placed their trust in him, and he wasn't about to let them down. As he looked out at the stars, Jason realized that this was the beginning of something new, not just for him, but for both species. Vrelka's voice broke through his thoughts. "You seem deep in thought," she said, her voice calm and gentle. Jason turned to face her. She stood in the doorway, her usual strength and grace radiating from her. It had been a long road to recovery for her, but she was now back to full health, more vibrant than ever. Her skin glowed brightly, and there was a renewed energy in her movements. Jason smiled. "Just thinking about what's coming next," he said. "There's a lot to consider." Vrelka walked into the room, her footsteps silent. "You've taken on a great responsibility, but I believe in you. I've seen what humans are capable of, and I know that you will help guide both our species into a brighter future." Jason looked at her, surprised by her confidence in him. "I don't know if I'm ready to be the one leading the way. There's still so much to learn, so much that I don't understand. What if I make the wrong choices?" Vrelka smiled softly. "No one expects you to have all the answers, but what matters is your willingness to learn and to listen. You've already proven that you understand the value of cooperation, of finding common ground. That's the most important thing." Jason nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. Maybe he didn't have to have all the answers. Maybe the journey was about discovering them together. Vrelka stepped closer, her eyes filled with understanding. "You've already shown that humans are capable of great things. Your people have come a long way, and now you have the opportunity to prove that even more." Jason looked back out at the stars, feeling the weight of the future pressing on his shoulders. But he didn't feel afraid. He felt hopeful. He had seen how the Cavatari could be strong, united, and resilient, but he had also seen the gaps in their understanding, gaps that humanity could help fill. Together, they could accomplish so much. "We're not so different, are we?" Jason asked, turning back to Vrelka. She smiled. "In many ways, no. We both want to protect our people. We both seek peace. We both want to grow and explore the stars. Our paths have just been different, but now they are converging." Jason felt a surge of excitement. There was a whole galaxy out there, and the possibilities for collaboration were endless. He thought about the future, about the partnerships that could be formed, the challenges they could face, and the knowledge they could share. "It's going to be a long road ahead," Jason said, his voice filled with determination. "But I think we're ready for it." Vrelka nodded. "I believe that too. The road ahead won't always be easy, But with trust, understanding, and cooperation, we can face anything. The door to the observation room slid open again, and several Kivateri officers entered. They had been working closely with Jason in recent days, helping him navigate the complexities of their culture and their government. They greeted him with respectful nods, and Jason could sense the seriousness in the air. One of the officers, a tall, slender Kivateri, stepped forward. "Jason Miller, we have made progress in our negotiations. The Council has agreed to officially open trade routes between our people, and there is a proposal for joint research initiatives in several areas of science and technology." Jason's heart raced. This was it, the moment they had all been working toward. The opportunity for both species to work together was becoming a reality. He glanced at Vrelka, who was standing beside him, her expression full of pride. "That's incredible," Jason said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" The officer nodded. "Indeed, there is much work to be done, but today we take the first step toward a new era of cooperation. Humanity and the Kivateri will share knowledge, resources, and support in ways we never imagined." Jason felt a sense of pride fill him. This was what he had hoped for all along, a future where humanity and other species could work together, not just as allies, but as partners. They would explore the stars together, learn from each other, and face challenges side by side. Vrelka placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did this, Jason. Your actions have shown us the way." Jason turned to look at her, his heart full of gratitude. "No, we did this together, all of us, and we'll continue to do it together." As the officers continued to discuss the details of the new agreements, Jason felt a sense of peace settle over him. He wasn't just a liaison anymore. He was a bridge between two worlds, helping them come together in a way that would change the future. He looked out at the stars again, knowing that the path ahead was full of challenges, but also full of hope. Humanity and the Kivateri had taken their first steps together, and there was no telling where that journey would lead. But for the first time, Jason felt certain of one thing: they would face it all, side by side.